through. This will be a very quick run through of the max phase test from 2016. This is another way in which you can kind of bone up on what's likely to be covered for the phase test in week 23. You should use this video once you've already attempted the test. There's no point really in just watching me do it. You should challenge yourself to try and do it yourself and then go through this just to make sure you've got it right. So, question 1, connect up the object so that pressing the button prints "I like pepperoni pizza" in the max window, and the word should appear in the following order. This one, you will remember, is very similar to the one you tried for the phase test from 2015, and you'll find that several of these questions in the test follow relatively similar themes. Exactly the same as we did last time. We'll connect up all of these because all of these message boxes need to be triggered at the same time, and they all need to be sent to the print object. And if we click on the button object now, we'll find that those are being presented in the wrong order, so I will put them in the right order. And here you should remember that everything runs from right to left in max. Clicking on that means that we get the the words in the correct order. So that's fairly simple. That would have earned you 5% of your mark. Here's another one of these numerical operator questions, and the same applies exactly to this one as it did to your last. Actually, not exactly. It doesn't ask you to do anything with floats. So you're only requested to, as it says, use the multiplication object to multiply two, what it should say, input numbers using number objects, which are these ones, and display the output using a number object, which is this one. Use the button object to ensure that the multiplication object will output values even when changing the right-hand input value. So we will connect up appropriately. Once again, we want the two number boxes going into the left and right inlets of this multiplication object, as these represent the two operands for that symbol. So the one on the left hand side represents what would be on the left hand side of the multiplication sign. What's on the right hand side is obviously what's on the right hand side. Sending the results to the output, and then because only the hot inlet of the multiplication object will produce output, we need to connect the right hand side to a button object and then the button object to the left hand side to trigger that output. And we will test it, and you'll notice that we don't get anything when we move the left hand inlet, and obviously this is because we're multiplying everything by 0, so don't panic if you find that that happens. As soon as we change anything on the right hand side, that will change, and anything we change again on the left hand side will now update appropriately. So that works correctly and is 10% of your mark. Question 3. Take MIDI velocity values from the K-slider and scale them down to values between 0 and 1 using the divide object. You will need to do this by adding an argument to the divide object. So, a common mistake with this one last year was for people to just connect it to the left-hand outlet, but if you remember from having used this object in your extensive research, you'll know that the left-hand side only produces note values. So we want the other side, which is the velocity output, and obviously we want to connect that to the divide object, and the divide object to the flow number object, which will display the output. So if we want to perform that calculation, so that range from 0 to 127 gets converted to a range between 0 and 1, we need to take the largest number of that input range and divide it such that it will come out with a number 1. And to do that, we need to divide by 127. Is that enough? No, because if I just divide by 127, it's always going to try and divide by integers. We need to put a point on there, and then the velocity value will divide by 127 point, which will give us the value that we want between 0 and 1. If I didn't put the point in, we would only get integers, which wouldn't be of any use to us. So we'll try that, What I should say is that to test this, clicking on the keyboard in its kind of vertical axis will give you different velocity values, which perhaps isn't obvious, but it does anyway. So you'll see that as I click towards the top, we're getting numbers up to 127, which are being divided by 127 point and giving us something between 0 and 1. So as I click close to the bottom, then we get something closer to 0. Next question, number 4. Using the set domain and set range messages, ensure the following. So you'll remember from the tutorials number 4 that this is the percussion synth engine, and all we're asking you to do is to add message boxes that will tell these various function objects how to behave. So it says, ensure the following. The function object controlling the frequency of reson has a range of 200 to 2000. So if we look along the reson object's inputs, we'll see that the third one along gives us the frequency. So it's this function that's controlling that, and so we need to control the range of that with a message box. So I will make a message box, and it's set range, and then you give the lowest and the highest values that you want within that range. So 200 to 2000. Connect that up, and when you've locked the patch, you must click it to send that command into the function object. So that has now been done, and if I were to hover over here, you will see that the y-axis now goes between 200 and 2000. Before, it would have just gone between 0 at the bottom and 1 at the top. Second thing, the function object controlling the Q of reson has a range of 0 to 50, and we do exactly the same. So I'm just going to copy this across but change the values in it. So 0 to 50, connect that up, and there we go. So this is now 0 to 50 in the y-axis. Last one, all of the function objects have domain lengths of 2000 milliseconds. Again, we can set, well, this time it's set domain, and we only need one value, which is the highest value, because it will always start at 0. So we just put in 2000 milliseconds, and we need to connect that to all 3 of the function objects. Lock the patch, click it, and then we have in each one the x-axis goes from 0 to 2000, 0 to 2000, 0 to 2000, and you've earned yourself another 5%. Question 5. This one requires you to use the plus object, which is here, to offset MIDI note values from the case slider by 2 octaves, which is 24 semitones. Well, that's easy. So it's saying note values which are coming out of the left-hand inlet go into here, and you offset them or transpose them upwards by 24 semitones. Then convert the offset MIDI values to frequency values and use these to set the frequency of the cycle object. This one again is easy. Connect the M2F object to convert to frequency, connect to the cycle object to set the frequency of it to whatever frequency is being output by M2F. Connect the output of the cycle object to the EZDAC object via the gain object. And there you have it. Remember that we're dealing with stereo, so if you're asked to connect a mono gain object to the EZDAC, just remember to connect it to both inlets of the EZDAC. That one's probably easier than some of the ones we've asked you to do earlier, and yet you get 10% for that. And in terms of a brief, it's very straightforward. It tells you to do things one at a time from top to bottom. Not all briefs are like that, but that one is. Number 6, use the selector object to select between 3 different oscillators, cycle, saw and triangle. Connect up the number object to allow a way to change which oscillator is selected. This one is pretty much exactly the same as one of the questions in the previous phase test. And once again, if you weren't sure what any of the objects did, or what, in particular in this case what the selector did, you could click on Alt, click on the selector object, and it will come up with the help file. And this is pretty much exactly how you need to connect up this set of objects. So the selector with 3 oscillator inputs going into the second, third and fourth inlets, and then the leftmost inlet is controlling which of those is open. But once again, we require an argument, as it says in there, but because there are 3 oscillators, we need 3 inlets, and we can connect those up to inlets 2, 3 and 4. Always remember the left one is for controlling which inlets are open, and here again we connect to a gain object and to the EasyDAC left and right inputs, and once again that one is done. Didn't test the other one actually, maybe I should do that. So there we go. So we hear the cycle object, we hear the sawtooth object, we hear the triangle object. So that one we know works. Yes, you should always test these. I should have tested this one before. Turn this one up. Okay, so our middle C, which is usually in the middle of the default... Shut up. The default keyboard has been transposed up by 2 octaves, which is why it's all high. Right, moving on to question 7. Use the toggle object to turn the metro object on and off. Again, we're really, in this phase test, we're telling you exactly what to do. Use the number object to adjust the metro object's time interval. Ta-da! The output of the metro should be used to trigger random MIDI note values between 0 and 127. Right, okay, well this one gets a little bit more tricky because you need to put an argument into random. So you need to know how random works, and the way random works is to offer random numbers starting at 0. So if you were to say 127 random numbers, it wouldn't give you 0 to 127, it would give you 0 to 126. That would give you 127 values, but they would range between 0 and 126. So if you want 0 to 127, you need to put in 128. Remember that, this is a common thing that people get wrong. Then convert these MIDI values to a frequency which can be used to set the frequency of the cycle object. And then connect the cycle to the EasyDAC via the gain object once again. So there you go. And once again we'll test it, so I shall crank this up to, I don't know, that. Crank the gain up. Okay, so we're getting all notes of the available pitch range pretty much randomly played and generated by the cycle object. Question 8. So this is the last one, and as with the last question in the 2015 phase test, you're invited to do a basic setup and then elaborate on it to show us your understanding of Max and that you're fantastically excellent at it. So the basic bit. Use the toggle object to turn the metro object on and off. Again, we can do that very easily. Use the number object to adjust the time interval. The metro should be used to drive the counter, and the counter should be used to step through values in the itable object. So we can do that. We need to add a value to that, but we won't know what that is until we read the next part of the question. So the main goal of this question is to produce a 16-step note sequencer that generates sound using the saw object. So if we want a 16-step note sequencer, we want to change two things. We want to change the table object to accommodate 16 beats, as it were. So going to the inspector window, we will go to the table size, which is going to be 16. And if you remember from previous exercises, those values go from 0 to 15. They don't go from 1 to 16. So your counter needs also to count from 0 to 15 so that it catches all of those beats. Then, as I say, you're asked to get this to drive the sawtooth object. Well, what's coming out of here are numbers, which we can think of as MIDI note numbers, and those need to be converted to frequency, and that frequency can then drive saw, and finally through the gain object, just as before, we can send that to the EasyDAC object. So that's a good chunk of the question done. We can just test that that works. So we have the lowest value possible in here, so let's... Okay, well that works just fine. Then it says there is also a preset object that should be used to store some sequences. Store at least 3 different sequences. You should be aiming to make these sequences interesting melodically rather than just putting in any old notes. So do think about that. You want to actually make it sound decent. But let's talk about how to use the preset, just to remind you. So here it is. All you do is connect the left-hand outlet of the preset object to the left-hand inlet of whatever graphical user interface object you want to store the state of. And then to store the state of that object, you need to lock the patch and press Shift while clicking in one of these nodules. When you've done that, you'll see that the square goes a slightly lighter shade of grey, and that means that the preset has been stored. If we were then to wiggle in there and produce another set of pitches, then we can do the same for the other one and toggle between the two. It remembers the states. So that's extremely handy. It saves you from having to use things like col objects or other things to store those states. But like I say, don't just put in any old thing. I do want you to think about what it sounds like. This is a music degree after all, for all of you. Alright, so I've had a minor play. It's not great, but it'll do. So you get the idea. It's not completely random is the point. It doesn't have to be the greatest tune ever, but at least it's not just some random wiggle. So from this point, what else could you do to make this better? So you get 20% for doing that, and there's 20% extra for developing the design. And it says you could consider adding more voices, perhaps by integrating functionality from question 6. Well, that's dead easy. All you do is take question 6 and copy it over to here and replace the bottom bit here with, whoops, sorry. That'll earn you a couple of points. So now that works. You could add additional oscillators to this if you'd like to. What else? Constraining the range of note numbers to be output by iTable. Well, this again we looked at in, I think, week 2, so we can drag that down, and it's a matter of Firstly, constraining the objects in iTable, or sorry, the numbers in iTable, and we'll do that by constraining to, for example, 13. So that would give us an octave and a note. Actually, I'll make it 14. So that's now obliterated everything in the table, so all of this stuff is now nonsense. But I could put in some values. Again, for now I'm going to be random, and we'll hear whether that's actually producing anything. No, not at the moment. Oops. That's because it's still, there we go, it's still trying to play the notes we had before. Now, why are we not hearing anything from there? Although it is, you can see that there is audio output happening, but it's all incredibly low frequency. So what we need to do is transpose all of those numbers up to a range above, say, note number 60, and we'll hear something. So we're only working within the range of an octave here, and that would give us, how much of an octave would that give us? Oops. Okay, so there's an octave between this bottom row and the almost top row. If we were to go above that, we get an octave and a semitone. But in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make use of that last row, which is Y value 13, to give us some rests. So if I put in select and the number 13, so this time I'm going to select the value that I don't want. So normally what would happen is if select encountered the number 13 coming out of this iTable object, then it would recognise it and spit a bang out of the left-hand outlet, which of course it still does, but I'm going to ignore that output and instead take something from the right-hand outlet of the select object, which, as you can see, says input if input doesn't match. So if I connect that to there, then anything above within this 13 row will be ignored. So now if I turn this up, you'll hear that. Okay, now when I say it's being ignored, what it's doing is it's disregarding this row, but of course these oscillators still continue to sound. So what I really need to do is to find a way of telling it not to produce output when it receives a 13. So how can we do that? Well, we could institute an envelope for all of those notes which is not triggered when we have anything on this row. So let's do that. I will make a function object. Oops, not the patch. Function object. And line tilde. And a multiplication object. And we will insert the multiplication object between selector and our gain object. So the signal goes through the multiplication object and it is controlled by the output of line. And then of course we can put in a little envelope into that, which will affect the volume over time of each note. So how do we trigger it on each note? Well, we have on only the notes that we are wanting to hear, we are getting something from the right-hand outlet of select. Remember that anything that is within this top row is being ignored. So we can simply run each of those notes through, and you can see it's only flashing when we're getting a note out. So that should So if we turn this up, we should hear so you can hear that we are, well, we're almost getting what we want. The problem is that there's still a decay of this note throughout the period when this upper row is running. And there's also another problem, which is that we've got clicking. Both of those problems are caused by the fact that this envelope is 1 second long, whereas our notes are changing every 136 milliseconds according to what we've got up here. What can we do about that? Well, using some of the stuff we've already come across, we can make a message box and say set domain with a $1 symbol in it. Connect that to that function object and connect that in turn to whatever it is that's controlling how regularly we're getting notes out. And as soon as I change this, you'll hear that the envelope shrinks to the... There you go. That works. So we're getting the number of the length of each metro period also being received by the function object, which is constraining the envelope of that sound to, in this case, 137 milliseconds, which seems to work okay. And it will do that for everything. Anyway, you get the idea. So, there you have it. There are other things you could do. It says also adding a second I table. You could add a second I table which allows you to have more than one note playing at the same time. Have a look at, I think, the second week of tutorials to figure out how that's working. Tidying up the patch. I'll go through this very, very quickly, but we need to cover that somewhere else. Tidying things up is very important when you're doing Macs. It'll make your patches look more professional. And I shall do that very quickly for this patch. So lining things up that basically are in the same kind of relative chain of events is probably a good idea. We could, actually this isn't too much of a problem at the moment, we can line these up. Lining things up, you select a series of things, go to the Arrange menu and click on Auto Align, and that will line those up. You can also align cables. Oops. Auto align those. That neatens that up a little bit. We could line all of these things up so that we have straight cables from the various objects to the selector object. Line that up. Actually, what I will do is, instead of this number box, I'm going to use a uMenu object. Go to the inspector window, whoops, and go to menu items. And then if you remember, you can give menu names to each of these selector inputs. So we'll say off, comma, sine wave, comma, sawtooth wave, comma, triangle wave. Oops. Okay, and that populates the uMenu, and we can connect that directly to the select object, because remember, the left-hand output of the uMenu object, it gives us numbers, so that will replace the numbers we're getting from there. Reduce that in size a little bit, and we can now choose all of those, oops, from this menu. So that works a little bit better. Again, tidy this up a little. This is where you start getting a bit pedantic. And there you have it. So that tidies up the patching mode. Oh, actually, that's something else I might do. If I do this, then my preset object can go down there. Presentation mode. This is a way of putting only the objects that you want your user to see in a pretty interface without all the additional gubbins being visible. So what would we actually want to see? We'd want to see the toggle object and that number box for changing the length of each note. The preset object you'd want, your table, envelope, the uMenu object for choosing sounds, the gain and the output. And when you've chosen the objects that you want to be able to see, you can go up to Object and Add to Presentation. They assume a pinkish glow, greyish pink, and then you can click on this easel icon down here which says Presentation Mode on it. Click on that and all of those objects get put into this presentation view here. And then you can choose to, for example, add labels to each of these so that it's clear what they do. So if I put a comment box in, we could put in start, stop, and we could put in, oops, well, you'd probably put in BPM if it was really BPM, but because it isn't, I'm just going to put in metro speed. You could change the size of this so that it kind of fits in a bit more neatly. You could even put the oscillator type up here. It seems to fit all right up there. And then you might put your envelope down here and make that the same size as your table object. You might put your preset all the way at the top. And then you'd probably might put your volume control here and your way of turning the whole thing on and off in the bottom corner. So you can fiddle a little bit with how it looks. And having done all of that, you could then, there we go, oops, and then maybe you could put all of that with a panel object, which gives you a kind of blank panel. I'm going to change the colour of that to make it interior colour, sort of those two colours. You'll notice that it's on top of all my objects at the moment. So if I go to Arrange and where are we? Send to back, then that puts that behind the rest of my objects. And I have what is a tolerable interface for my little instrument here. So I will talk about this more in due course, but you get the idea. This should provide you with a oh, and of course what you might probably want to do is to put a name in there. My fab synth thing, where I can also put this up here and change the size of it. 16. There you go. Anyway, that'll do. There's the 2016 phase test overview, and I hope it's helped and that it gives you a few more tips for next week's phase test.